Anne-Marie. I think I've known Anne-Marie's name for 20 years, and I think it's actually the very first time we've ever met. So this is the fun part about the CGA. So good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jason Adams. I'm with Irth Solutions. It's a long story how I'm back at Irth Solutions, but it's a fun one. So what we want to talk about today is the ability to leverage data inside of our 811 notification systems and how that data can help us make better decisions. So they said there's going to be a Q&A afterwards, which I'm really excited to participate in because this is the best place for us to get feedback into some of the work that we're doing and some of the things that we've seen. So currently I am the Executive Vice President of Irth Solutions. Prior to that, I was the CEO of a company called 4IQ Solutions, which was acquired by Irth Solutions about 6 months ago. And prior to that, I was the CEO of Irth Solutions. And so it's a weird world, but I think it's important to kind of start there because when I first started in the industry about 25 years ago, we really were trying to figure out how you would build a system to send out a ticket accurately. It was really simple, right? There were fax machines, there were emails kind of at that point, and there was just the introduction of GIS. I remember the first time that we integrated polygonal data inside of a GIS one call center. We saw the amount of outbound tickets drop dramatically because you were able to accurately recognize where your facility lines were. And that's going to be important as we kind of go into this conversation, how I believe risk and data is the next challenge that our one call centers are going to be presented with, and how that kind of aligns to how GIS was about 15 to 20 years ago. So as we're going to go through this today, I'll talk a little bit about some of the different offerings that we have, but really going to focus on our Exactix one call product because that's what we use to understand how we create one call tickets. But I think it's very important to understand that at Irth Solutions, we're the largest receiver of data in this industry, bar none. You take the biggest contract locators like USIC, who's doing 100 million transactions, which is a very impressive number. We're doing about 120 million received tickets in our platform. The reason that's critical is the amount of data we have access to and the ability for us to see trends in that data, which allow us to do what we believe are more proactive measures in making better tickets. So there's a couple ways that we approach our risk algorithms, right? And so one of the first things that we look at is a learning model. And this is very simply what I think most people are familiar when they talk about risk. I know my industry really well. I know the excavators that are potentially causing me challenge. I know when I have a very tough dig because of the weather or the type of work going on. We can actually populate our programs to identify that data and make better decisions. So that's kind of the learning model. It's taking that local knowledge of people that are familiar with the situation, putting it inside of a filtering system and using it to make better decisions, which is great. When I first started, I was like, this is awesome. There's all these people and they know everything and I know nothing. So how can I learn and understand from them? And after about 25 years, I've gotten much older. My knees hurt a lot more than they ever did. And I feel like I know less today than I did when I started because of the absolute speed of which this industry is moving forward. It's one of my favorite things to talk about is how technology has really become a partner in damage prevention and tried to make people safer. We deploy some of the best measures that we know to make more accurate tickets, but also one thing that we talk about is making safer tickets. Because what we want to make sure is that when we're deploying our field forces out there, that we're putting them in a safe situation. And so the next step of that is this artificial intelligence, AI, right? It's everywhere. ChatGPT, you can create art, you can do whatever you want. I find myself going down these black holes quite often. I go into ChatGPT and I ask it a simple question and it responds back and it actually gives me a much better response than half of my friends. So I'm trying to have more conversations with it because they're more productive, it seems like most of the times. But one of the interesting things with the AI urge, and it just feels weird because I think in a lot of places AI is actually now really starting to become a more broadly accepted term. People see some of the value that it's bringing and people get to play with all the unique powers. So how do we leverage that inside of our industry so we can make better decisions and keep people safer? And so I think that's going to be a really interesting thing. Probably the key, and I'm going to say this 1,000 times and I'll say it over and over, data is the key. One of the things that we'll talk about is Sarah made a great, compelling speech to say, use dirt, right? Really put your damage information, because what makes our world unique is we have action and reaction. And that's the great foundation for doing a formula for understanding how risk works. So an action is we create a ticket. A reaction, one that we hope we're not experiencing, is an incident or a damage. But when those things do exist, we can look at the original data and find any trends that align with that, and then use that information to make better decisions when we are actually creating tickets. So we'll get into that some today. So artificial intelligence, and here in my notes say, look, we're looking at ticket data, we're looking at damage data, and then we're looking at external data sources. But for the process of this, we're going to focus on the ticket information and mainly looking at what's on a raw ticket, how that information is valuable, and then we'll talk about other factors that affect that that are outside the scope of a one call, such as weather and other things like that. So this is a good case study. If any of you hang out with engineers and developers, they speak a different language. I've been lucky enough that I've learned to communicate with them a little bit over the past 25 years or so. My partner, who I've worked with my entire career, John Cachet, who's one of the best developers I've ever met in my life, sat me down about 2 years ago and explained this to me, and I think I finally figured it out like 6 weeks ago, so I'm feeling more confident to talk about this. But how does AI perform incidents? Real easy, and we kind of talked about before. We're looking at the total amount of data, and we're looking at actions and reactions. And in this case, what we've currently found inside of our models that we're training is we found the ability to predict incidents, 50% of the incidents that are occurring out of the top 10% of the tickets that you receive. What that basically means is we've identified, if you take all the tickets you receive or all the tickets that are being created, we can say of those that cause damage, can we identify the trends of the top 50% of those? And we've been able to identify that in the top 10% of their tickets. So realistically, we can help you understand where risk is greater and then how you can actually do actions to hopefully minimize or at least lower that risk. And so we'll have that conversation more and more as we move forward. In this case, we've had a couple of our utility members that use our platform start providing this data. What they're doing in certain cases is doing notifications out to the field to say, hey, look, we see this ticket presents more risk based on these factors, and we want to give you a notification about this. So the first thing we said is, okay, this is working. We're actually seeing savings. We're seeing damages get reduced by doing these notifications. But that's really good on the receiving side. So then what we started to question is, when we're creating tickets at the call center, how can we leverage that data to make a more accurate ticket that is safer? But we're going to talk about the tricky path that a one call center has to walk in that. And I see a lot of one call centers here. And so the appeal is, how do we use risk without isolating tickets so that one ticket seems less risky than another? Because we don't want to do that. No call center wants to say, you can ignore this ticket, but you need to look at this ticket. Right? That's not a good stance, and we're not one we're here to promote. What we're here to promote is the idea of using that data to make better decisions when creating the ticket so it gets delivered to the field, a better quality ticket. So the best thing you can do is blend AI and your learning model, right? Because what this allows you to do is take the AI, which doesn't care what shirt you're wearing today, doesn't care anything how your day goes. It makes decisions based on a very simple equation: action, reaction. And then we take our actual learning model where it's my gut feelings. It's what I know. It's the information that I've been in this industry forever, and I know that this locator's a bad guy or this excavator always damages me. So I want to make a note inside of my system to give me some feedback so I'm more prepared to handle that. That's kind of easy on the receiving side, but it becomes a little more difficult when you're blankly creating tickets at the one call center side. So, but being able to combine that data gives us what we believe is the max accuracy. So taking your knowledge and machine learning knowledge and bringing it together. So, and you can see in this little chart, hey, one of the fun parts about being back at Irth is we get really good marketing guys and they make all this stuff for me now. So if you've ever seen one of my presentations before, it's really much nicer now because I used to like hand draw stuff. So I'm impressed Josh made this for me, so thank you. But what you'll see here is in this little thing, this automation versus intelligence, one of the pieces that's critically important is when we first started doing one call centers, and I think one of my sales pitches many years ago was garbage in, garbage out, right? Because for years, when you created a web-based ticket, what was happening was you fill in a little form, and then an operator would receive it on the other side and then put that form into the system, and then a ticket might get created and go out. And we go, that's not building efficiencies. Building efficiencies was when the end user creates a ticket in real time and it sends out, and we eliminate the need to have an operator in that position. And what we should do is leverage our operators to do much more detailed work in training people on the process and really focusing on building the effort better, because we're not going to stop the train that's rolling down the tracks because everyone's going to be using the internet. We have centers that are in the 90% of their tickets are being created automatically by users out in the field without anyone ever touching them. So that's great, but it also puts a lot of onus on the system to deliver a high quality ticket that doesn't introduce any additional risk based on human putting it in out in the field versus an operator putting it in the office. We've seen studies before where sometimes tickets are actually not as accurate because the operator has to translate what the person's saying into an actual ticket. And so sometimes there's a little lack of communication. Maybe they describe it incorrectly. Maybe the operator just didn't hear it correctly. So when we actually have the people in the field creating the tickets, we see a much higher level of accuracy. One of the reasons for that is GIS is so more accurate and accessible today. And that's important because we're going to talk about right now, no one sees it very challenging to go in and see a map and say, hey, I'm digging here. But that's 15 years ago, that was amazing. What happened 15 years ago, God, I'm so old now, like 20 years ago, there were grids. And if you would just go through and you select this box and you go, I'm digging in that box. And then the guy receiving the ticket would be like, well, at least I know he's digging within a mile or two of here. And then you had to figure out eventually, you had to get out to the site and do all that. Now we're accurate. We have states that are putting a 50-foot buffer around the dig site. That's how accurate it is. So as comfortable as we are with GIS and what advantages it's brought to the market, the next thing we're going to ask is to take data and leverage good quality data to make better decisions, and so we can get comfortable with the influence that data has on that process. And we're going to start talking about the whole 360 thing and why your participation is so much more critical than it was in GIS, because this is an action, reaction, and another action step. I'm flying through here because the mood lighting was chill earlier. If you guys walked in, it was kind of, I thought we were having cocktails and cigars, and Bill took my seat, so now I'm going to have to sit up here and act like I know what I'm doing. All right, so now what we have is the examples of risk variables, right? So what are those risk variables that we would look at when creating a ticket, when a ticket's sent out, so we can are we identifying the areas that we believe introduce the most risk into a process? What excavators have caused the most damage, right? That's always kind of a finger pointing thing. That excavator's a bad guy, that guy. One thing I always try to remind everybody is the excavators, while sometimes they do the damages, most of the times they're doing them on behalf of the utility owner. So you have a very big stance to say, yes, an excavator did it, but it was my excavator. And so how do I educate that person to become better in this? So that's one step. What work type has caused the most damage? Anybody have a guess what the number one work type is? Pedro? There you go. Look at that. That guy's on top of his game. Directional drilling is what we've seen so far to be the highest damage indicator for risk when it comes to tickets. And it's that way by a considerable amount. The same way how no-call locates is the leading consequence for actual damage. This is kind of the work type that stands out. So immediately, if you can imagine in the AI world, when you see that trend a lot, that factor rises to the top. And it says anytime there's directional boring on a ticket, let's be a little more precise in the information we're gathering. Let's not somebody just take a large notification area that might be a mile big. Let's make sure they're getting more accurate. Let's ask additional questions to see what's going on. These are all factors that we can help make more accurate tickets. Of course, as we see the boring kind, explosives. Interestingly enough, explosives and work type and damages is extremely low. Extremely low. The reason? People see explosives, they take it seriously. They go, oh, explosives, I better do something. That's that local knowledge. That we know if somebody's using explosives, we know, because we've been around for a while, sometimes way too long, that we know that there you can actually see that when there's explosives, there's a greater chance of risk just because of the nature of explosives. But because of that, we see less damages because people put more effort in doing it correctly. And that's a really important lesson because that gives us a foundation to say when people are aware, they perform and behave better. And so that's what we're trying to do, because what we're not saying is I'm not up here to sell you a system that says, you use my system, there's no damages. That's baloney. That doesn't happen. What I'm here to say is when you use our system, we can identify trends, any one-call system, we can identify trends where risk occurs, we can then educate. And that's what you need to do. We're going to talk about education a lot because having all the data and doing nothing is the worst sin there is because you don't change behavior. And if you don't change behavior, then the action that happens after the reaction doesn't equate to a success. Because what happens is you just keep going in the same circle over and over. And with AI, one of the things that you want to learn is action, reaction, action. That secondary action is that maybe I rolled a truck out on this particular ticket, thus I didn't have a damage. And if I do that enough, my damages go down based on that risk variable. And the next risk variable rises to the top and identifies itself. So you want this ongoing process. The beauty of AI is that it's dynamic. As you make adjustments in what you're doing, the results help you indicate what your future work should be, but the future results of that allow you to reinvest what's now the new risk factor. So that's important, and I think it's often overlooked. And then finally, what locators have been the most at fault for damages? None. No locators ever caused a damage, so I'll just go on that one. Great examples of risk, consequence of impact. We can see 811 ticket data. One of the biggest factors, of course, that we've seen, and you'll hear everybody, there's a lot of people doing risk and stuff, and so we'll all talk about what our secret sauce is. No one wants to open the covers. If you want to have a conversation with me and ask me what our risk factors are, I'll gladly have it with you. I'm here to promote safety. That's the fact. I've spent too much time in this industry for at the end of the day to think that we haven't made a significant difference making people safer. And so that's what we do. So if you want to know these factors, we can talk about them and why we use certain ones. But one of the things I will tell you is those factors really vary based upon geographic regions, right? Obviously, we know if it's the middle of winter in Florida, you're still digging. If you're in upstate New York, you're sitting on the sidelines for a little while, right? So the risk is probably going to be significantly less in February in Buffalo than it is in Fort Lauderdale, right? Because they're actually doing work. So that's one area, and we're going to talk about how different models get trained and the data that's on there. But one of the biggest ones, of course, is asset footprint. It's so gigantic, how big the actual footprint of the asset. So not the actual proposed dig site, but the footprint of the actual asset. And why that's important to the stakeholders is a lot of stakeholders are still very comfortable having very large notification maps. And that's great. And I think it's for a lot of facility owners, especially large pipelines and so forth, having a larger buffer around your facility area for notification is smart. But in some areas, the larger that notification area is, you're just, of course, more square feet, larger risk. So I don't think enough people think of getting more precise in their registration data actually reduces risk. Most people think it's the opposite. They say, well, I want to be notified everywhere. And what happens with notified everywhere is over-notifications. Over-notifications mean that our contract locators can't get out in time to locate everything, and that opens up a can of worms when it comes to risk. So interesting, it goes kind of against what you think. My gut would always say, let's keep it wide, that's safer. But in reality is the more precision that you put in your registration data, as long as your one call center is very competent at creating accurate tickets, it's a huge reduction in risk. Other areas that we look at. Unfortunately, infrastructure has a huge bearing on this, right? If you're doing underground dog fences, your risk factor is pretty tiny because most people go, the guys don't care that much. The guy's doing putting something in. You hit an electric dog fence, no one files a huge complaint. There is no damage ticket typically associated with it. A guy goes out with a pair of pliers, puts the thing back together, and it's on. So you wouldn't think much, but when you look at guys like fiber runs that have gigantic fiber runs going through, that are just straight polygons going through, you would say, well, they have very narrow registrations. They're probably not at risk. Interestingly enough, more at risk than we've seen in a lot of our electric companies, because electric companies' risk happens not just in the ground, but theirs actually happens up as well, right? So they have lines that are run high, and now we have vegetation issues, and we have hurricane issues, and we have all these other things. So it's a little bit different. And of course, footprint of the size of all your facilities have a pretty significant impact as well. So here's the fun part. Challenges when using risk. I don't have an answer. I'm just going to start that right now. I have a lot of my own call centers in here right now, and I hope they're not sitting there going, boy, I can't wait till we put risk in our system tomorrow, because that's not actually what's happening. What we're trying to figure out is engage in the conversations today to say, what level of comfort are we okay to automate the process of using risk? And what our level of comfort as a vendor is versus the level of comfort by our state one call centers pretty much is going to vary state to state, right? So the different levels, and we've seen it in GIS, we've seen it in a lot of different work that we've done. So in this case, the challenges of using risk, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, and it's still like, it puzzles me because I don't know the answer, is I don't think we want to ever create a ticket that's less risky than another ticket. I just think the minute you brand anything with that risk, of course, the automatic detention is the one call center says it's risky, I better go work these first. And I don't think the one call center wants to be saying one ticket has more risk than the other one. What I do believe the one call center would like to do is say, when I'm creating the ticket, can I use the knowledge that I understand where risk is most valuable and use it to guide me to create a more accurate, less risky ticket? And some of those factors include rechecking the actual validation of the GIS map data, looking to see at the registration data of the actual utilities who are being notified on that ticket. When was the last time it was updated, right? Because we said earlier, the more accurate those registration data is, the more reduction of risk we see because we have smaller, tighter registrations. So one of the things that we're looking at is when you're creating a ticket is to create a notification that would actually say, when it goes out to the end user, is to send a follow-up notification to say, your maps haven't been updated in 2 years. That's just a little push to say, hey, maybe you might want to go take a look and make your registration data a little more accurate. Maybe you should get in there and do that. Because remember, we're not trying to solve everything today. We're trying to build assurances that we're building safer continuation of the process, and doing that is one step. Of course, another step is being able to trigger different notifications based on risk as well. So you alert people within inside of your own organization that a ticket might, using your own kind of learning model, be able to notify you that internally we have an issue, we need to take a look at a ticket that we're submitting because it shows a higher risk level before we actually submit it. And we'll talk about some challenges there as well. Now, one of the things that we were kind of alluding to earlier was this action, reaction, and action. The reason for that statement is there's something called drift. And I didn't know what drift was. So one of our developers sat me down and explained it for like 2 hours. And so I'm going to try to repeat what he said. And when I fail miserably, we'll blame him. So really what drift is the long view of our AI model, action, reaction, and then that other action, when it starts to shift, we have to update our learning model to take into consideration the results of previous models, okay? So that meant we have a model at Irth right now, we call it our North American model. We've taken 120 million tickets over 10 years, so we've done over, I think it's 1 billion tickets we've run through this thing. And we've looked at as many damages as we've had, and that gave us the baseline for our North American model. And we apply that model equally the same across everybody. And that makes a lot of sense at a very generic high level. But what we haven't seen is what we talked about before, regional, right? What happens there, weather changes and all that. So now we're also building models that are state-based. And now we're also starting to build models that are utility-based. But one of the reasons that is important is because when we're introducing all these new factors and we're seeing the different actions and reactions, when our users are actually doing an action, we're seeing that what once was a risky thing for them is now less risky and something else appears to the top. And so then we have to train the model again. So whenever you're talking risk with anybody, if it's not a dynamic process to train the model, and we're employing quarterly training right now, our goal by the end of this year is to do real-time training. So when you're using our risk models, you will actually be able to take your data from yesterday and populate it into the model and retrain the model the next day. I can't tell you how Target did something like this in their store. Our data scientist group actually did their AI work for Target, and they increased the sales of lipstick by 130% by using AI. So you can't put lipstick on a pig, but we can put it on a one-call ticket if I get this right. So the idea is you got to keep training the model, because what they saw at Target was when they made an assessment, they said, let's move this product to this level because it has the best success. They did that, it started to sell, but it had a negative impact on the other areas. And so they couldn't just say, we're making all of our money because this one's selling more. They needed to rise all boats. And in order to do that, what they had to do was say, now that this action's happened, how do I counter against it and get other areas in the higher thing? Same thing we're doing with our risk model now, retraining. And yes?
Is the training of that algorithm model supervisory or non-supervisory? In other words, is there any kind of user input from a supervisory perspective where you can input information into the model to make it more robust, or is it strictly unsupervised?
Yeah, so in our general offerings, kind of our North America model and our state models, those are all done internally with us. So then the next step that we do is then we take the model. So imagine this, the model's just the math formula, right? I've got X plus Y over Z and blah, blah, blah. Once we figure out that formula, we grab it. And then we take that one and then we run your data through it. So in this case, we go to a one-call center and we say, we have this model, but now I'm going to take that model, that formula, and I'm going to go to Florida, and I'm going to say, we're going to run all your tickets through it and see what happens. Then we're going to check with the actual members in Florida to make sure this seems to be exactly what they expect. So that gut feeling, that kind of learning model that we talked about. And if there's something that doesn't feel right or the trending data doesn't align with the statistics that we're keeping, then we go back and we work with the individual users to say, what other things are we missing here? Why are we not seeing the results statistically that you've seen from historic data? Right? Because it's kind of difficult because you're kind of throwing a dart at a moving dartboard, right? Because what happens, so what we try to do is give the ability of our clients to influence their own model individually, and that's where we do those kind of works. The other area that you can do those is, remember, we talked about the learning model. That's why the combination of the two are so important, because if you have a baseline AI model, then you can influence. So the baseline AI model should just be one category of risk that you've identified. Then you also have your learning model, which is your own influence. The combination of those two things give you an overall risk score. So now you're still being able to influence, but we do expect that most of our clients are going to use very specific data on their scenario. So they like the overall model, but let's be realistic, the model that fits New York doesn't fit Florida. So then what we had to do is now we'll retrain that model, and then we'll only use New York tickets in that model. So I hope that it's okay. Any other questions while I'm on a roll? All righty. Make sure I got everything. All right, so this is actually kind of addressing this. One of the things that I will ask, beg maybe, AI models are only good as the action and then the reaction. The only place right now that our industry shares reaction data is dirt. Now we have a lot of different utility owners who keep their own damages, their own incidents, and that's very important for us. One call centers do it as well. But it's hard to look nationally, and I will stand wherever we go and say, our industry needs to get dirt to a much more sophisticated platform because we need to be able to do real-time extraction of data, because without that, our risk models are so far behind because we're relying on damage data from a year ago. Well, the world changes quite a bit. Look what happened between the year before COVID and COVID. I mean, it's a completely different world. I mean, if I was a betting man, which I am, I would have bet my house on the fact that one-call tickets were going to plummet during COVID. As a business owner who charges based on transactions in a lot of time, I'm trying to figure out who I'm going to lay off because I was going to have such drastic reductions in tickets. And I was completely wrong because all we saw was skyrocketing numbers. One call centers were producing more tickets than ever because I didn't take in the factor people sitting at home were bored. And guess what happened? Everybody started doing homeowner projects. Everything started going on. And then they said to get back to work, we're going to do the infrastructure bill. And it became bigger and bigger. So, having a world of knowledge is useless when a pandemic hits, right? So that's very important because we need to understand all the factors that we use when we're creating these tickets. So, and again, I'll say this over and over, please press the CGA to get a better model on dirt. Please, let's talk to them about having a dynamic system that allows us to have real data access. And let's forget about pointing fingers. Let's learn that great data allows us to make better decisions that allows us to stay safer. And we got to get rid of the little, because we can't get an insurance company to give anyone a discount if they properly train their people, because they say there's no way to justify across the industry that there's no way to really compare that model if properly trained people show less damages because we don't have a good repository of damages. So there's tons of money to be saved. If you have work where you have OSHA workers who they go through OSHA training, the insurance policies drop dramatically on that section. We should be able to do that in our world. We should say, if you've done this education and you're this qualified, your risk is less and your insurance company should help out. But I'll get off that box. Common use cases in damage prevention, notifications around assets, of course, that's an easy one. Calculating the associated risk, of course. Determine tickets that are located in high profile or high consequence areas. Kind of an interesting term, right? HCA, a lot of us know a lot about that, what that looks like. One of the things that risk does, I think it starts to align very well the HCA and the notifications that we're doing with that. Because what we're really saying is, what's the riskiest area? And do we have, because risk takes in many factors, but what factor we're not using right now is financial. And we're going to talk about that in a bit, right? Because I think in a lot of companies, people are saying, what's my financial risk for a damage? We're not taking that consideration. We're just now looking at saying, what is the potential for risk on an actual ticket? And we don't care if that risk is in finance or human life or damages to facilities. We're just saying risk. So that becomes a very interesting one. And then finally, completing the follow-up activities. This is where I was telling you, we have actually clients now that are using it to notify areas, notify excavators. Listen, in our book, that's a riskier ticket, so we need you to really focus on that and to send a notification. I had a client that said, look, I can't roll a truck. I do 1 million tickets a year. I can't roll 100,000 extra truck rolls. And I was like, let's just send a notification. Let's just send that notice out. We did this in a large company in Kentucky, and we saw a dramatic reduction in damages only by sending an email out. So if we could put that onto the one call center to allow them to encourage sending out additional notifications that are not necessarily a ticket, it might be a way to spread the word about potential risk. This is a really interesting slide that basically says, how do people use systems to communicate? In our world, you can see there's, 25 factors. Without a doubt, the highest notification that we do is based on risk right now. So we're doing, I'd say, 500 to 1 versus the next closest one, which is inspection. So that gives you an idea where people think the biggest impact is on risk, and by doing outbound notifications. So the automated process. Risk is great, but when it becomes a lot of overhead, people don't use it, right? If you have to do a lot of work and all of that process. So what really is important in here is that we create a ticket, we send the ticket, and then the ticket right now currently gets scored inside of our risk system, right? So we put an assigned score on it by the AI, and then we do the machine learning one, and then we do the individual's perspective on that one as well, and then we automatically send the notifications. That's what we do on the receiving side. The question is, what do we do on the creation side of the ticket? And that's the conversation that we're really trying to engage our clients in now. And I think for the health of the industry, it shouldn't be a vendor-based conversation. I think this really needs to be an industry-based conversation saying, we've got great data. The amount of data stored inside of this industry is mind-boggling. And the fact that no one really outside of our industry knows how critical this data is kind of blows me away. But we need to start using this data, and we don't need to keep it in silos that are hidden from other people. We need to share the information that comes out of this. So one of the next steps that we'd like to do is, One is we believe that having a common outbound ticket type and inbound ticket type amongst all software vendors allows us to stop worrying about having to update all of our clients when a law changes. They can simply do it themselves. And what that means is less time for us to write all the software we have to do to adhere to those changes, and more time to advance our entire platforms and all of this industry further. But that also goes into the conversation of saying we want to talk about risk with everyone else to say, what factors are you seeing? What are we missing in order to get better at doing this? Because GIS was a little pushback. If you were around 20 years ago, a lot of people were a little scared that GIS was just getting too accurate. The tickets were going to be not too precise. They were just afraid we were going to miss a lot of stuff. And that's comical today. So I'm not going to be around when risk is accepted and used all the time. But I want to know that at least we laid the groundwork so that in 20 years from now, God, I hope I'm not still around. In 20 years from now, we'll see the impacts that this conversation has had on creating more accurate tickets. Or somebody could just invent a perfect shovel that never damages anything and put me out of business tomorrow. All righty. So right now, and these are, but we're actually showing how we've integrated risk inside of our ticket process. This will be coming into our Exactix platform, is actually putting risk information in it as well. This is the first time, and it's real simple. What's great about this is it doesn't require a specific platform. Risk is great. Risk is just data. We actually have, I think Texas is in here. Texas 811 is one of our good clients that's just using our risk algorithms. We have nothing to do with their ticket creation. We don't do anything with them. All they simply do is take all of the tickets that are coming out of the system, put them in, run them through our API, and all of them get a risk score. It's great. And then they do some determination. I think they actually have a service that goes in and makes an outbound call. They'll notify the facility owner that there's a high-risk ticket. And so it's just one way people are incorporating the data. So don't think of this as a vendor-based solution. Think of this as an AI-based solution to make our industry better. And then we actually, I know it's kind of hard to see this, but one of the cool things in here is what you're seeing, and I would blow it up bigger, but we're showing all the risk factors. So we're showing not only what the AI shows, but we're also showing in some of these charts over here who the excavator was, how many damages that excavator's had in the last 10 days, the last 100 days. We look at how many damages. We show all of those on the screen so the person that's creating the ticket potentially will see all of this information displayed to them so they can make a better determination. You can't change who the excavator is, you can't do any of these factors, but at least you can start to identify those challenges, especially if somebody's calling. One of the things that we keep thinking about is when we start seeing, when you create a ticket, you can see factors that are higher risk that will show those to you kind of in a feedback as you're creating the ticket. So it gives you an indication that you might say, look, there's this contract locator is going to do this ticket, or this facility line is going to be at it. What steps am I going to take to protect to make sure we're safe? So really cool piece. And then you got to have good charts. Very simply, contributions to risk. What we've talked about is likelihood versus actual incidents. And so what you're seeing is very close. Tickets that are negligible also are very unlikely to have a risk factor, whereas tickets that are very likely and have a high risk factor puts it in that upper category. The reason you build charts like this is because when we start building our AI formulas, what we're looking for is that top corner, right? So this is how we look for it. So the top corner identifies where damages most likely will happen. So then what we do is we populate our AI with all the damages. That's our reaction. And then we go back and look at the action, which are all the tickets. And those that connect to that highest corner are the factors that that help us determine risk. And so then we make that inside of our formula to say, if this factor's going, put a higher risk score on it. So you start like this, and then you end up getting something where it's categories we're going through. I'm sorry, I don't know how much you guys want to see all this. When we talk about risk, we go through every single individual step to say, how do we see what areas introduce risk? Because what we've talked about mainly right now is high risk. We'll talk about low risk here in a second too, and why that's important. All right, what are leading companies doing better to mitigate risk? Well, simply they're deploying it, right? So the first thing they're doing is they're using good quality data, and then they're doing notifications out of it. The reason that these steps are important is because we've got to see how our utility members that are receiving tickets and using risk make choices because in many cases, they're the same people that will be submitting tickets, or at least somebody on their behalf will be submitting tickets. So we understand that when they see the advantages of using risk to identify their tickets for either outbound notifications or other steps, that this actually adds more value, and it brings them into the conversation saying, how can we take those measures and put them in at a one call center to get value? So in this case, I think gas transmission monitoring, I think most of you are pretty familiar with these. High pressure coupler notifications, one of the things that you'll see is certain types of work that we start to see kind of stand out that none of us knew. You know, I've been in this industry forever, and there were certain factors that the damages and risk identified, but then I had to step back as a human being and go, wait, I got a lot of experience, and that doesn't seem right to me. And then what we realized is, in many cases, this goes back to the damages, people weren't reporting certain damages, right? There were a lot of damages that just weren't being reported, whether it's because financially it wasn't worth it to report it, right? Where we did see the reporting correctly was on people's own system, where they tracked incidents and damages on their own internal stuff, so very accurate there. But then when we looked at the kind of national repository at DIRT and looked at those, I don't know if I trust it as much, right? Because right now it's a lot of times, and if you've ever combed through the DIRT data, then your life is as boring as mine. But then the big thing is that we see there's some significant disconnections in what my gut tells me versus what data is actually in that system. So I think that's a pretty important thing, that to build AI, we need high quality data. And I'll say no one has more data than what we're currently working with. The challenge becomes is, I don't have great reaction data unless I rely specifically on my clients. So one call centers that are tracking damages, and I think this is going to be a big step for us in the future progress of our platform, is making damage tracking more accessible, right? Making it more easy for the one call centers to track that damage data. A lot of them do good jobs right now submitting the data to DIRT. I think in Florida we have virtual private DIRT that's used in all those pieces. We'd just like to see that quality of data get better. It's better for everyone in the industry if we have higher quality reaction data. All right, benefits of this. Proactively identify risk, of course. Immediate visibility into high consequence areas, right? This is really important, I think, especially for pipelines that are having to do HCA notifications in that area. Risk allows us to get ahead of that curve. Previously, HCAs were based on geography. There's a high consequence area, there's a potential dig site, let's go with it. But now we can actually take into consideration factors outside of that. We can look at areas where there's a school geographically located nearby. We can look at the dig site, but then we can also look at the work type. If somebody's installing an invisible dog fence, probably not going to put that pipeline at risk. We still want to be aware of it, we still want to locate it. We still probably are required to send a notification by HCA, but this at least gives us a better qualification of understanding the potential overall consequence in that area. This is what we're about. Focus the damage prevention resources using real data. Like, stop guessing all the time. Let's use real data to confirm our guessing, and I think that's really important. And then finally, automate the steps and assigning the correct people about risk. If your organization is doing any AI, which I think everyone is now, understanding how to embrace risk, understanding how big data really helps you make better decisions, it's pretty common speak now in most utility companies, I hope. All righty. So, I don't know how long I have. All right, I think we have 15 more minutes? All righty. So that's kind of my steps going through everything. Does anybody have any questions that I can address? All righty. Okay.
You were mentioning risk based on the locator used or the excavator used. Are you seeing any risk based on technology used or as-built are available or anything that's not human-based?
Yeah. So we do right now in our core North American model, we only use data that's on the raw ticket right now, because that's kind of the level playing ground that everybody has. But yeah, what we are doing now is you're going to start seeing, I think, especially in some of our more progressive centers, is kind of what we're calling expanded or enhanced positive response, which are going to start to make the communication a lot more two-way, right? It's no longer, here's the ticket, I marked it, end of conversation. It's, here's the ticket, I couldn't get out there. Oh, here's an as-built to make your locate better. All of those steps. When we start getting that data in with the actual positive response and it's consistent, and it would be nice if it was, I don't want to say mandated, but as long as it was consistent doing in that, those factors will involve. But we already know that tickets that have certain characteristics, including associated GIS maps and that, we've seen less damages based on those. Now, we don't know why. I think we all have a pretty good indication, but the data tells us the more accurate, the more material we put into the hands of the entire group, right? The excavator, the locator, the facility owner, the more that we do see a reduction in risk. So those factors are probably not as precise as we want them to be right now, but it is an indicator, and it'll be something that will go heavily, because in our world, when we see that, the obvious thing is, how do I encourage my clients to make those steps? Because if it reduces risk, if it reduces potential damages, that's why we're in business, right? So I think that's the obvious next step. Misty?
What are your specific, concerns with dirt data? Is it more in the specificity around what's being put into the system itself that's maybe been scrubbed too much? Can you be more specific about how we can?
There's cross data, which causes chaos with algorithms. So multiple people putting in close, but not always the same information, right? You'll see a ticket ID. I see this ticket ID, it says 123 Main Street. But I also see that same ticket ID and it says 132 Main Street. And then I see that there was, the excavator said, this guy did it. And then the locator said, this guy did it. It was a mislocate. And this one said it was digging in the wrong space on the same one, which is okay for initial risk, because all we really worry about is ticket ID and incident. We don't care anything else, right? We just say action, reaction. So initially it works, and that's why we've been able to build our models. But as we dive down deeper, I want to get more precise in understanding how that works. Then we get all of these mixed messages. And when you have mixed messages, especially when doing large, vast amounts of data, it then makes the entire equation null. And so that's, you go through and you put a lot of effort into it. And if you can't validate, because what's the worst thing is to say, this is the riskiest thing based on our algorithm. And then we take a completely different set of data, but so we've taken 1 million tickets and we've gotten this data. We say, this is what we expect. We go, okay, our algorithm works. And then we take another 1 million tickets and we put it in and we get different results. And then what we have to do is that data significantly different, or is the incidence different? And we don't know, because in dirt data, there is no check that says this is real and this isn't real, or this is opinion and this is fact.
Would it be better for the on-call centers to help, filter out what that looks like? For example, I know we see a lot of operators reporting no-call damages, and lo and behold, we go back to the system and we can find a ticket.
Yeah.
So similar in process, a lot of states don't do a damage ticket, but the ability maybe for all of those people to be notified that a damage occurred out there, and then all collectively be able to dispute, address the issue, and associate that one damage to everyone's perspective on it at one time. Maybe that would help, long-term affect, get better damage data.
At least what we've seen, states that track damage data have a system submit data to that's kind of outside of dirt. I think New York's a good example. I think there's mandates in the state of New York that if you're a gas operator, you have to report your damages to UDIGNY, whatever the name, UDIGNY? Yeah, there we go, UDIGNY. Poor Kevin, UDIGNY. All right, so anyways, we've seen that their data is significantly more accurate, and the formulas that we build for risk, looking at his data, is always going to be more accurate and give us a better leverage point to take that data. So in our, opinion, we think that if one-call centers want to start tracking that, and we don't really, remember, we don't care who's at fault. What we care about, ticket ID, and was there an incident or wasn't there? That's all we care about right now. If that was there and more people felt confident that it wasn't going to put the responsibility of ownership of the damage on them because they submitted data, if all it simply was is, there was a ticket, did you have an incident or not? If there was just a checkbox, if every single ticket, and there wasn't, that would move our process of data so much further than where we are today. And it's so simple, but it's a big ask, and it's a huge ask across the entire nation. But I will tell you, we have to give props to this industry. When I started, we replaced fax machines. That was it. When I sold software, I said, it's cheaper to use this little floppy disk than it is to go to the store and buy ink. That's the way it was. And now I sit here and I talk to you about dealing with hundreds of millions of ticket data points and all of this. We should applaud ourselves how far we've moved this industry in just the last 25 years. But I also think, looking back at that, I can't look forward 25 years and know where we're going to be. So I think this is really a very important time in our industry to say, we're grown-ups, we know AI is real, we know big data is important. How do we embrace that? We made that pledge 20 years ago when we did it with GIS, and I think we need to make that same pledge moving forward. So as you guys sit out here, the owners of all this data is critically important. And so being the governors of that data, all we're simply saying is, let's make sure the data is high quality so we can build better choices off of that.
Have you incorporated any compliance data from states that have enforcement?
That's in the works, you might say. So it's, you know, the first thing, Bill, really was, does this work? I mean, we've been talking about it internally for a long time. Then when we finally built our first, we started this when I was 4IQ still. And so we didn't have any money. we basically, when we wanted to spend our official data science team the first time, it was a significant investment for us. And then we were like, oh my God, please create something that has value, right? And so we started that, and then we did see that, oh my God, it does identify the trends as we expected. So we're kind of easing into this, because right now it's like the next obvious steps for us are going to be outside factors that we know have a direct impact. Compliance data is absolutely one. State laws are significant in that. And then you look at stuff like weather. You look at stuff like the time of day, month. We look at traffic patterns and those kind of things. So now we're starting to engage new data, and we just brought in our data scientist team and made a significant investment in them. And that's going to allow us to build these real-time models, the real-time dashboards, which are going to be incredibly important. But that's also going to give us the ability to see visually what factors are having it, and then for us to go back and load the next data set in and see what difference it does.
Yeah, the success we've had is we have damage data, but then we have our compliance data. And so it closes that confusion a lot of times, the damage data.
Right.
But then the other thing that it's brought to light with us is we're talking about building risk around damages. Mm-hmm. We can also build risk around violations.
Absolutely.
People not abiding by the law.
Yeah, and it's, you know, what's interesting there is what we've done is the first factor, and I won't stay on this too long, but it's great when we've identified risk. But if you do nothing, it doesn't matter, right? The same risk goes on. So what we've seen is now we've identified risk. Now how do we educate? In your case, when you have those violations, right, to go out and say, okay, listen, you're introducing risk into this process. If you end the conversation there, you haven't done your job. What you should say is, you've introduced risk, go over here, take this training and make sure you understand why this puts more people at risk. And then even in a lot of scenarios, you can't create a one-call ticket until you've gone through the training and you show that you're competent. Once you're competent, we'll welcome you back in. Let's create more tickets, because now we know that you're more prepared to make a ticket that aligns with what our goals are versus where you were previously. But yeah, I think you guys are pretty progressive in Tennessee with a lot of the stuff that you do. So we think there's some great opportunity to leverage risk in that area. But those are the conversations where we don't always have them in our group, right? We have a lot of states and we have some good conversations, but we need everybody to join in on this, because that's how we're going to solve this as an industry and not as a vendor, which is what we need to do.
For the output of the risk model, when you're identifying tickets that are more riskier than others, say in that area high risk, I suppose you could have different modes of how you would action them, whether it be an email or a phone call or even like a special dispatch.
You got it.
To talk to the excavator, making sure they're aware of the markings on the ground, what work they're doing. Are you finding in your research that one mode is more effective than others?
You know, it's so early that it's not fair. I guess we could actually talk with Kyle a little bit out of Texas, because they're doing a lot of outbound notifications. Our clients mainly are just doing emails because of the cost process, right? We do have those that say, if it's a certain facility type, mainly it's a gas pressure line at a certain size, and it's high risk, they'll actually roll a truck, right? So they get out there. Those, of course, are the most effective, right? But it's from a cost basis, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You can't roll a truck every time. What we have done is outbound calls and emails, but we just really been doing it for less than like 6 months right now. So the data right now, I don't think is, We don't have enough to validate the impact of the reaction of that.
Have you guys considered any of the quality scoring that you're doing on tickets in Corsetra into your model?
Yep, I'll just say yes. We had some fun tricks up our sleeves, I think, in the future. One of the nice things about getting reacquired is that our partners have invested a lot into our expansion of our Exactix platform and Corsetra, so we're starting to see that now. And the integration of those things, for us, it's only natural. We need to train people properly. We saw when you train people properly, they use the software properly. So you build good habits. Now we want to train them properly of how they should be working in the field. Kevin, of course, does it in New York with his certified excavator program. But we also want to get more precise at saying now how to use our system more efficiently and use risk more efficiently. So those will be introductions we'll be doing soon. The one thing is that we didn't talk about, and I think I'm supposed to be done here in a second.
Yeah.
Oh, am I supposed to be done? The last thing I was going to tell you that is the most important thing is that it's time to go. No, I'm not going to tell you the last factor. No. I appreciate everybody's time today. It was real fun to get a chance to speak with everybody. If anybody has any questions, please feel free. My contact information's up there. And I look forward to seeing everybody for the rest of the conference. Thank you.